Good evening, everybody, and a very warm welcome to tonight's event. My name's Max Saunders. I'm the Director of the Arts and Humanities Research Institute here at King's, which puts together the Arts and Humanities Festivals every year. And as you can't have avoided noticing as you came in, the theme for this year's festival is play. And it's a real pleasure to be welcoming Pat Kane to give the lecture this evening. Pat is a musician, a writer, an activist and a consultant who wrote a book in 2004 called The Play Ethic that has been extremely successful and has enabled him, on the basis of that, to set up a global consultancy on issues of creativity and innovation and the power and potential of play. He also writes and sings and plays with his brother Gregory in the band Hue and Cry. Now, in case that sounds like he's been having too much fun, I ought to tell you that he's also been rector of Glasgow University in the early 1990s, has been a founding editor of the Sunday Herald newspaper in 1999, a leading figure in the Scottish independence campaign of 2012 to 2014. And he's currently curator of the wonderful Future Fests that take place in London. Pat is very committed to the idea that play isn't just a trivial activity by any means, and he's written that the trivialization of play was the work ethic's most lasting and most regrettable achievement. It's a fantastic quotation, I think. And he goes on to say that this is play as the great philosophers understood it, the experience of being an active, creative and fully autonomous person. And when we chose the theme of play for the festival, it became obvious that we simply had to invite Pat Kane to speak to the theme because no one has done more interesting work on it, I think, recently. So, as I say, it's a great pleasure to welcome him tonight to talk on a title which is also the title of his and Indra Adnan's forthcoming book, Radical Animal. And he's going to be talking about constructing the creative self. So please join me in welcoming Pat Kane this evening. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone. It's a delight for you all to have turned out. Very nice to see every single one of you. I treasure and honour you completely as you sit there. Just to say, just a brief sort of overview of the style and tone of this event. I am a commercial artist, a commercial player, as it were, and I often don't find myself in situations where I can escape my format. So this isn't, I'm not going to ask you to juggle bouncing balls, I'm not going to be shooting water pistols at you. This is not necessarily going to be that playful an experience, but believe me, I'll be at play because this is exactly the kind of thinking and public speaking that I don't often get the chance to do. So I hope we enjoy the play of the concepts of nothing else. Here's the lecture plan. I'm going to talk at the beginning about what I call the creative innovative imperative, with a few examples. Secondly, I'm going to talk about the critique of the creative innovative imperative to kind of get that out of the way. And then I'm going to talk about a shift that I've been making actually since I wrote the play, I think in 2004, which was a work very much informed by my own humanities education as an English and Film and Television Studies graduate at Glasgow University, graduating in 1985. And so I was very affected and inflected by continental theory, by literary theory, by cultural theory, but I've moved into other areas now, or supplemented it with other areas of knowledge, more conciliant areas of knowledge, in terms of the natural sciences and even sociobiology. So that describes that shift, which kind of got me to be thinking about play on a much deeper level. So that's the next part, which is to talk about play as the deep and evolved foundation of creativity. And then the next bit will be to talk about how that view of play as constitutive of ourselves as evolved human beings has societal, political, institutional consequences. I think we can build a society out of not just our idea of play, but the rich conception of human nature that thinking about play opens up. I think we can build a better social order, a good society out of that insight. And then the last two bits are really just kind of cautions to myself. The book originally was written in 2004, which was just, before the crash and in the midst of the dot-com boom. And I remember going back to the index of the book and seeing that it didn't have one mention of the environment in it. Plenty of mentions of robotics and nanotechnology and bioinformatics and every other area of technological Promethean purpose that you could ever wish to see, but not very much about the environment. So that's been a corrective on my work in the last couple of years, is to think about the fact that our technological global playground has planetary limits, and I'm going to talk about that. And then finally kind of advance on what I might mean by a radical animal. So I hope that's clear. That's the plan for the next 40, 45 minutes. So just to be intrinsically playful, I guess I started my research for this a couple of weeks ago, but a week ago I thought I would throw a request out on Twitter. And of course, if anybody says, do we live in a playful society? Where are the playful institutions? Well, Twitter is the playful institution par excellence. It's a game you play with your social relations. So I thought I'll chuck out a request and see which amongst my 5,000 odd peers, what kind of answers they're going to give me. And the request was, any pieces come to mind that do a recent overview of creativity/innovation practices in business and organizations? So for the next few minutes, I'm just going to show you what was sent back to me. Not all of it, but just the choice bits. Now, the first bit that struck me was this delightful corporate appeal. This is an organization called Nielsen, which I remember being a ratings company or a poll company that it always brings the early American presidential results, but it seems to have moved into a whole lot of other areas now. And this is something that they have got called the Breakthrough Innovation Awards, and it's basically assessing the top performing, according to certain criteria, consumer products of that year. And so here they are. Recoil. Let me just slightly anatomize these for you. There are 18 items, 10 food items, 3 main course, 2 dessert, 5 of them are snacks. 3 of those are healthy snacks. One's called, it's not snack food, it's real food to snack on. The other one's called Skinny Pop Popcorn. We believe in snacking without compromise. Many of them are associated with countries, or non-Western countries. Bai apparently is Mandarin for pure. Bai is up there. There's Italian ice creams and Italian main courses. There's Greek yogurts. And the rest is animal care, domestic products, medication and cosmetics. I think that's an extraordinary picture. It's like a kind of Burgess shale of fossils to be, or it's a kind of like an archaeological dig that a Martian or a Venusian or an Alpha Centaurian has made of us, 2,000 years hence. And really, if you're talking about finding creativity and innovation under your feet and being in the midst of an arts and humanities festival, the art and humanity that's involved in this is quite extraordinary. As I say up there, many of the products are concerned with odor and aromas of your cat, of your dog, of yourself, of your house. So again, completely going for the somatic, physical nerve centers and anxieties of being a person, being a human being, an embodied human being. The medication is, as I say, heartburn. It's either to deal with all the stuff that we've eaten, or it's anti-allergy to deal with all the stuff thrown up into the biosphere to make the stuff that we've eaten. As I say, there's a sort of poetry, there's a mythos about the creativity and innovation that's gone into devising and marketing these products, and the vocabulary that's used. There's indulgences and miracles. One of the laundry products is called a gain fling. A gain fling? That sounds like it describes most of my life under neoliberalism for the last 10 years. We're always involved in gain flings, but that's the name of the product. I won't go into the philosophy of the Bai health drink other than to pick up the last sentence, which is to say, this is the result of all the labour, of every choice, every decision that got us to where we are at this exact moment. That's what you're drinking when you drink your Bai health food. And here is the register of success of creativity and innovation for this, £90 million, over £90 million sales, the fact that your sales decline only goes down by 47% the next year, and that you have attracted up to 83% of new buyers to your particular market. Now, that's dispiriting, but I think the bit before is actually quite interesting, symbolically, semiotically, in terms of the references, the cultural references, the kind of energies that go into humdrum everyday consumer culture. A second thing that someone sent me from Twitter was this, which is another advertising document called Selling Creativity Short. And I didn't know this. Is anybody here from the advertising industry or the marketing industry at all? Okay, none of you. Apparently, there is a huge anxiety in the advertising industry about the decline of genuinely creative processes in advertising. I sort of had some idea that this was a worry, but I had no idea that it required huge reports and huge advocacy to kind of defend it. Now, they're not doing it because they all have a novel in the drawer and they are natural romantic artists and they're just sharpening their tools, selling stuff to people in order that they can do something else in their hinterland. This is creativity and innovation actually intrinsic to the business model. This report makes the case that creative campaigns rather than non-creative campaigns, and they define a creative campaign as one that actually gets lots of awards from their peers, is several times more efficient in terms of the spend that you put on it than a non-creative campaign, i.e. it lasts longer and it sells more because it stays more and stays longer and more deeply embedded in the hearts and minds of consumers. And there's two bits that define a creative campaign. One is what they call the fame effect, where campaigns that create buzz around the brand, encouraging online and offline conversations. And secondly, these campaigns are, it says, almost without exception, essentially emotional in nature, and therefore tend to work more powerfully over the long term. Here are the categories of a creative advert. Creativity seems to be the first one. That's tautology from the get-go. But secondly, co-creation. You invite consumers to contribute to the campaign. Breaking rules and taboos, even if you're naughty with your own brand, apparently. Association with a big social and ethical cause. It brings a new dimension to the brand. Unexpected juxtapositions of ideas and mediums, seeing things in unusual places. Unexpected use of celebrities. And extreme humour. Now, as I say, I hope that standing at an Arts and Humanities Festival, you can see the range of techniques that are being deployed here. Familiar, estrangement, humour, ethical claims. This is the form and shape of creativity as it would be sort of recognised from an Arts and Humanities perspective, but it's utterly at the service of a corporate or a brand bottom line. And here's the kind of things that they're talking about now. I'm presuming you're all occasional TV watchers. Maybe you've all thrown them out in favour of a diet of TED Talks and MIT OpenCourseWare. I don't know. But if not, then the top one is John Cleese doing the "You should have gone to Specsavers." I think in the current campaign, I think he's beating a car with a branch, which is one of his famous things that he does. That's the John Lewis ad, a very magic, realist, poetic celebration or poignancy about disconnection and loss in older age. You're Not You When You're Hungry, the Snickers campaign, which I think the most notable one is Joan Collins, the Hollywood megastar, takes the body of an angry rugby player who is lacking in nutrition. And that one is McDonald's crowdsourced campaign around about the 2012 Olympics, where they sent people out to basically record their lives in a mass observational, video autobiographical way, and McDonald's pulls it together into a beautiful testimony. Really excellent piece of filmmaking in celebration of the popular community aspect of the Olympics. So I kind of went through that, just literally finding stuff at my feet as a modern consumer and trying to assess and feel the creativity and innovation in it beyond a kind of rejection of it as consumer stimulation or mere format or formalising. I think that I'll come back to this at the end. It's what we do with that creativity and innovation that is deeply wired for us as species. What are the institutions and practices that make the most of that? That is my fundamental point in the lecture tonight. So the next thing that came into my Twitter stream from the random set of peers that I seem to have collected over the years on the play ethic address is all the critiques of the idea of creativity and innovation as a good thing. These are two books. One is by Angela McRobbie called Be Creative, and another one is called Critique of Creativity, and I read them in the last couple of days. And again, the idea that creativity and innovation is a valuable thing to have as a guiding principle for your life and your career, from some perspectives, seems to fit in extremely well with the current model of capitalism, because what neoliberalism wants you to do is to be constantly monitoring your performance as a worker, as a communicator, as someone who brings the whole interior element of yourself to the marketplace, to the job, and does so in a way that's energetic and that you get paid for. You're basically a solitarian rather than a proletarian. It's your sensibility that is required, and an identity as someone who puts creativity and innovation at the core of their life makes you not just susceptible to that model of being under neoliberalism. You become enthusiastic and passionate about it. The idea that you self-create becomes absolutely at the service of the dynamic selves that neoliberal consumer capitalism requires. So it's a trap and a snare. That's that perspective. And again, the whole idea of that is that in terms of the fabric of your everyday life, is it opens you out to a life of precariousness and insecurity, and so the whole idea that one would have a career that persists, through stages in an organisation just seems, embarrassing and boring and not responsive to opportunities and chances. You're in the gig economy and you're pursuing projects. I'm sure this is already part of some of your lives. But in terms of what one might think about 20, 30, 40, 50 years ago as a backup for all that self-creative activity, not much. Not much sick pay in the gig economy, not many employee rights in the gig economy. And even the idea of joining a union just doesn't seem to make any sense. What would it do for me? So that's the critique of creativity innovation from quite a lot of left critics, is that it makes you susceptible to the current state and form of capitalism, which is very invasive of the self, very exploitative of your sensibility and uniqueness. Now, there have been some responses to this that aren't just critically negative. They're saying, well, if there's something about the Millennial Generation, if there's something about the way that we exist through very flexible structures, whether it's markets or networks or communication networks, maybe we can make something of this. Maybe there's a new social contract or a new social order that we can build on this. And I was talking about this in 2004 in my book, The Play Ethic, but I was absolutely delighted to see Paul Mason, ex-Channel 4, who I talked to about post-capitalism, and after that, Williams and Chernysheck's Inventing the Future. Now, they are talking about how to create collective structures that make the most of people who are excited about living flexible, creative, innovative, centric lives. And some of the ideas that they come up to cope with that, the kind of what comes after the welfare state, what comes after the education system, it's not brand new. As I say, I mean, you can go back to Tom Paine, William Morris, and Andre Gortz for some of these ideas. But the creative, innovative life, if it was to be sane, rather than maddening, if it was to be flourishing, rather than frazzling, would require things like universal basic income or citizens' income, which would give people a floor above which they could survive and be more experimental and more flexible with their lifestyles. A shorter working week would address the automation question. We have a rise or a march of robots that are automating mental and manual labour to such a degree that by the middle of the century 40% of existing jobs are going to be gone, then deal with the fact that there's less of that kind of work around and release more time into our lives without too much loss of pay, such that we can live these more creative, innovative, flexible, self-determining lives. And the other point that they talk about is, well, how do we deal with the fact that digital technology, as I talked about in 2004, decommodifies things, it takes the price tag off things, but what it does is it generates a rich commons that we can feed into and take out of. How do we make the best of that rather than lament it? Rather than Apple copyrighting everything that moves with its latest download, how do we value this as a commons rather than re-enclose it for profit? Because that's the only way we can think of generating money in our society. And all these are being tried now. It's a ripe moment. As I say, people have been talking about these ideas for 30 years, 50 years, 100 years, 150 years, 200 years. But in Europe and the US, all these three some of them are being tried locally at the moment, Finland at a national level. But will they catch on and be successful? That's the question. And I think that's also possibly a problem, because to begin to answer that question, you've got to get, I think, beyond and below the appeal to reason. Isn't this a sensible policy? Look at the numbers, look at the trends. We must shift towards this. Whether it's advertising or whether it's politics, what the Times tell us is that we have to think about the emotional dimension of our public and rational projects and plans. If we don't do that, we will be completely subverted in terms of what we want to build or create or reform. And play is a key into that. Play is a little keyhole into how we might deal with the emotional substrata of the rational purpose of life. Now, here is an event which I'm sure we might agree, exemplifies that. How do we critique and demystify our way out of Brexit? Alan Finlayson, who is the editor of Renewal, which is the Journal of Social Democratic Thinking in the UK, had said a brilliant thing. He said, usually what the left does is to look at a terrible situation and say, what is to be done? What that usually means is, how can we analyse this situation so that it fits our analysis? And he says that the question really is not as what is to be done, but what is this? What do we have here? What just happened? And I think one of the ways to answer that question is that we can't just look at this in a cognitive, rational way. We need to go directly to the emotional level. We need to go directly to concepts like risk and security, fear and confidence, care and anger. So how can thinking about play and human nature and how it works in that help us address some quite urgent questions about the social bond in this country and elsewhere, and in America and in parts of Europe? And I think this is quite important that we talk about this, because I think post-Brexit, I think we are in a sort of situation where there may be a kind of polarisation around identities of creativity and innovation. Hipsters versus white van man, to put it crudely. The flexible urban city, cosmopolitan, capacious, creative. Inflexible, suburban town, monocultural, recalcitrant, routinized. The man at the top is the guy who Emily Thornberry snapped on her Twitter, and he's standing in front of her door of our £3 million Islington townhouse with his English flag. I don't know who these lovely hipsters are. So if we are in a situation where there is a real polarising politics around about the identity of creativity, of innovativeness, of openness, of flexibility, we need some new accounts of what I'm calling shared common human nature. And those accounts have to have some authority about them. In my life and in my mental world, a lot of authority is coming from the mind sciences, A lot of it is coming from affective neuroscience. A lot of it is coming from evolutionary psychology, what used to be called sociobiology. There's a proper debate to go on there to whether that is scientific authority or whether it's scientism. I accept and understand that debate, but we need some accounts, some unifying accounts of human nature really quite desperately in this society and in other societies. So this is why I'm interested in play as the deep and the evolved foundation of creativity. And one of the things that I've been learning and I've been developing since I started writing and thinking about play in the early 2000s is that in terms of accounts of evolved and biological human nature, it's not just the Joker card now, it's not just the exception to the rule, it's not just the thing that sort of defies evolutionary fitness. Why do you play? You waste energy, you open yourself out to predation. It doesn't seem to serve any purpose, a bit like sexual pleasure or sleep, but therefore it happens. And so evolutionists have been perplexed by play for many years, but the decade of the brain over the last 10 years has begun to create a map of the evolved emotions. And in that map, play begins to make an awful lot of sense, and an awful lot of sense in the strict terms of adaptive fitness. You play to be adaptive to a changing world, and you very much avidly play to be adaptive to other complex creatures like yourself. What I've got here is just are two maps of the affective, evolved landscape of human emotions. This one is from Damasio, but also Paul Ekman has added to this. So just to go through them, so primary level emotions that have evolutionary adaptive properties. We need them to survive. Sadness, disgust, anger, anticipation, joy, trust, fear, and surprise. There's lots of debates about these terms, but already you can sort of see play coming through, and the next slide will nail it. This one is from a model called the Human Givens model, which in the book I'm writing with Indra Adnan we're going to be using. And they have a different list, but it's worth going through that. Fun, meaning, status, control, community, attention, security, connection, achievement, privacy. So you're already seeing overlaps and differences and perhaps bigger palettes and smaller palettes. But the idea of a human given is that it's something that you come to the world with as a part of your organismic, biological, evolved equipment. Like the Chomsky universal grammar, except spread across a wider framework. Now, this is my favorite neuroscientific account of play. It's by a guy called Jack Panksepp, who is famous for discovering that rats laugh. And he discovered that rats laugh by tickling them. So if you want to have a laugh, look up some Panksepp tickling rats videos. They are infectious, I think is the word I would say. But his system puts play, he actually names play. So we've had joy and imagination and other sort of synonyms before, but he puts play quite clearly in, I think, quite a usefully boiled down list of primary human emotions, which is care, lust, panic, fear, rage, delightfully seeking, the idea that you are a bounded organism and you have a world on the inside and you need to know about the world on the outside simply to find out what's going on. And then to add to that, play. And within what I'm sure you would agree is a very primal and gritty and sort of fundamental list of human emotions. Play comes in mammals as joy, glee, and happiness. In humans as laughter, sense of humour, and I think we can see it moving into the arts and so forth. Where are we? Yes, I'll go back. I'll go there for a bit. So what play does is that it generates options for the organism. And it generates options for the organism, not just in terms of survival, in terms of the brute physical elements of dangers, but for the complex organism in front of it. So play is a real necessary lubricant for social animals that have a lot of imaginative power in their cortexes and in their dense neuronal structures. This is another great account of play. Just to sort of say this, people sort of ask you on many of these discussions, what is play? Tell me what you think play is. What are the basic conditions for what you think play is? They do it brilliantly here, Patrick Bateson and Paul Martin. Play is fun, so it's spontaneous and it's intrinsically rewarding. You do it because you want to do it. Play equals joyful free will. Players are protected from the normal consequences of serious behaviour. So you're playing with everything. You're playing with taboos, you're playing with power, you're playing with authority, you're playing with sharing and giving and destroying and creating. You're playing with all the structures, but you do it in a way that is not fatal and is educative. Play generates novelty. That's one of the core definitions of it. It must be generating new combinations of stuff, whether it's old stuff or new stuff reframed. It looks different to normal behaviour. When someone's at play, you can see that they're at play, and everybody sees that and knows the meaning of it. And quite crucially, play indicates well-being. It only happens when the organism is free from illness or stress. It's an absolute well-known convention in refugee camps that the worst is over when the kids start to play in the mud and with anything that they can find, any object, any bit of stuff. There is a sense that the corner has been turned, and when that extinguishes, it's the sense that it's gone down again. So it's pretty constitutive to joie de vivre, to the élan vital, to the spirit of life. They make an interesting distinction about playful play, and what they mean by that is that, and again, this is a point I'm going to come to at the end in terms of us being radical animals. Play can go dark. Play can get involved in power struggle. Play can get involved in someone stepping over the line and turning a fantasy simulation into something that might actually hurt someone. So play always has that possibility to go over. But the best play is the play in which we are cheerful, frisky, frolicsome, good-natured, joyous, merry, rollicking, spirited, sprightly, and vivacious. I hope you would think that's exactly what I've been for the last 25 minutes. And another useful distinction, just to kind of give you from their scholarship, is that they don't think that in terms of the play perspective, that creativity is the same thing as innovation. It's really quite a useful distinction. They see play and the playfulness of play as generating many, many options, and really literally not so much ready, aim, fire as ready, fire, aim. And the innovative moment is when you peel that off the wall and you decide what is the most interesting splurge, what is the most interesting production, what is the most interesting nuance. So that's quite interesting. That's quite a useful way to think about play in everyday life and in organisations. How do we separate out between the creative process that's generating lots of options and the innovation that turns those options into action for a purpose or for an organisation? I think it's comparable to the distinction between invention and innovation. But the more playful something is, the more options it generates, and the innovation comes in to turn it into practice. Okay, so as I've said, I think we're in an era where mind science has a great legitimacy. I think it's not just got a great legitimacy in terms of its institutional backup. I think it's beginning to explore and explain a lot of the human condition. And I think play stroke creativity is now beginning to seem sensible. And Max said at the beginning of the presentation that one of the great tragedies of the work ethic is that it made play a trivial affair. But one of the great glories, actually, of contemporary neuroscience is that it's restoring it to its effectivity in the human condition, which is basically, the best phrase I like of it is by Brian Sutton Smith, the educational psychologist, who talks about it as adaptive potentiation. Potentiation meaning generate options so you can cope with the complexities of life. And that seems to me a very, very tightly defined and very valuable way to think about play. And we need to play and create, otherwise we deny our basic emotional needs. And I don't know if any of you have heard of nudge thinking. Has anybody heard of nudge thinking here? Daniel Ariely, predictably, we're all predictably irrational. Nudge thinking basically says that we're all basically Homer Simpson. We are just these savannah creatures. God knows how we got from the savannah to be in this complex room with all this complex technology. I can't imagine how that actually happened. But anyway, we're all just savannah creatures who can't cope with our own modernity. We can't cope with our fast food. We can't cope with our technology. We can't cope with our bills. How can we possibly be fitted to the 21st century that we've actually created? And he talks about it as, so we have a reflective system and an automatic system. So Homer only has an automatic system. He has no reflective system. And this is the model. Homer Simpson is the icon of nudge thinking. And I constantly respond, well, what about Lisa Simpson? And Lisa Simpson is a player. You know, she is imaginative, she's idealistic, she's enthusiastic, she's expressive. She's not broken between a reflective system that's constantly subverted by an automatic system, by, you know, higher level cognition that's subverted by our caveman past. She's in a whole system. She's an integrated person. And she's evidently a player, and play helps her do that. So really, the nudge thinkers cover some of the ground, but in not recognizing the core nature of play to human nature, the core functionality of play to human nature, they miss out the very form-filled fact of human existence, the very fundamental form-making creativity that human existence also is, as much as it is us not coping with 2016 because of a certain evolutionary settlement 25, 30,000 years ago. That's not the whole story, and play tells you it's not the whole story. Okay, how are we doing for time? That's about 10 minutes to go. Okay. So, if this is a powerful, rich account, what's the society that's consequent from this? What kind of world could we live in if we accepted the account of human nature that comes from effective neuroscience in general, that there are human givens, that there are human needs that should be answered for happy, healthy social organisms like humans to thrive, and with play and creativity at the core of that. So surely it's a world in which these ranges of evolved emotional inheritance are given their due, their rich and complex due, which is extremely different from them being manipulated, which is why I have the breaking point photo, the famous, utter misrepresentation of the nature of migrant activity coming into the UK from UKIP, just below the beautiful and sensitive McDonald's still from their 2012 popular video about the Olympics. There's a real challenge here for people who are advocates of creativity and innovation and more of it, to realize the context of the emotional life of their communities that play and innovation sits in. It can't solve all problems. It really can't. The fact that people are, and it's so obvious from our public life that people are being triggered at the primal level of emotions all the time, whether it's their rage, their panic, their fear, their lust. It's an extraordinary truth about contemporary existence, but because of the recursive, self-aware nature of contemporary society, no bit of knowledge isn't instantly connected to power strategies. So whatever I might know or whatever we might know about how restorative and invigorating and liberating focusing on play practices is for a justification for a whole set of areas. The bad folks know that too, and they will be in and about trying to trigger those emotions to get certain effects. And the old Kantian phrase, I'm sure you all know it, as deeply philosophical people, out of the crooked timber of humanity, no straight thing was ever made. So again, how does play help us in this scenario where we know that powerful forces are gaming the evolved drives of human beings for fun, profit, and power? How does play help us in this scenario? Well, maybe we should politically value the institutions and spaces and places and grounds where play flourishes, identify them and push them hard. And in doing so, we just hold out spaces, and maybe we create new spaces in which playfulness keeps us alive to all options and keeps us responding to the complexity of the other. So play zones and play spaces that keep us complex and responding to the complexity of others. What would those be? Well, we know the ones that we have. Education, generally, in its ideal sense, have a particular animus for 3 to 7 year play-based kindergarten training, which so many sciences tell us is absolutely essential to fully developing and preparing kids for cognitive learning and later schooling. The idea that we start sending kids to school at 4 or 5, never mind testing them at 4 or 5, is preposterous and self-destructive if you want to even create these flexible, innovative, capacious creatures who will be ready for a totally demanding 21st century information capitalism. You don't send them in uniforms to school at 4. That just doesn't go with the grain of human development. Another play space that we should value is the net. We need to defend the open web of the net. That's one of the greatest play spaces that has ever been in human existence. It's absolutely homologous with all the great play spaces and constructed from a happenstance of a military project and an idealistic scholar at CERN. But we must defend its openness because it's easily re-enclosable. Another play zone will be festivals, carnivals, like this one. Like Future Fest, which that's a picture of a cybathlete from Future Fest called Claire Lomas, who basically does marathons with exoskeleton legs, and many more besides her at Future Fest. And the point about these festivals, carnivals, is that we are constructing a space where people come together and allow boundaries to be blurred or conversations to be had or experiences to be shared. That's a play space. And the fact that there's more carnivals and festivals and events is, to me, a sign that there's an appetite for play spaces, places in which we can encounter complex others and raise our game about how to live in the 21st century. Banally, but still you've got to defend it, the arts and cultural sectors and their subsidies. I was at an event yesterday in Berlin where a lot of Europeans were saying we don't have the entrepreneurial, startup spirit of Silicon Valley. No one wants to take risks that valorize failure and that allow things to crash on the ground and allow failure to be educated. And I put my hand up and I said, you have the most amazing subsidized art center or art sector in Europe compared to America, where risk and failure is absolutely embraced. Maybe you're looking in the wrong place for your model, for your business model. And primary science. I think primary science is classically a play space. Andre Geim, who discovered graphene in Manchester just a few years, this extraordinary subject, basically did it by playing around with sellotape and pencils, and is explicit about the role of play in primary science. I think Stephen Hawking, I think he was in The Simpsons, is effortlessly playful. And again, that's an institutional setup that has a relationship to funding that can be defended because it generates a play space which is good for the options and the possibilities of any society. And then I think we have to think about creating new play zones. When the next platform, the next information platform is going to be alternative reality and virtual reality or mixed reality. And it's very easily enclosable. You stick on the helmet, you stick on the smart glasses, and you will be in the corporate's world. So again, like the internet, we're going to have to fight for an open, common, expressive dimension in AR and VR, whatever way it's done, whether it's by hacking, whether it's by abusing copyright, whether it's by setting up alternative networks and platforms. That has to be done because that generates a play space. I also think we have to think about not just play supportive zones, but zones that look at play in the wider context of all the emotions, the evolved emotions that we know are important for human flourishing and survival at the moment. And one thing I tried to do in the original book was to talk about not the work-life balance, which was work as the alienating thing and life as the rich and full thing, but the play-care continuum. And what I meant by that was, could we get to a situation whereby what we're doing is responding to people's finitude as carers and responding to their infinitude as players. And I think that's a sort of a life that a lot of young people who have disconnected from the career ladder seek to build, in the spaces and the clubs and the scenes and the galleries and the new communal living arrangements that they build, sometimes out of necessity, but sometimes out of virtue. And I think there's a lot that we can do if we look at the emotional repertoire coming from neuroscience and say, what is the housing setup, what is the making industrial setup, what is the welfare setup that answers a range of evolved emotional needs with play as part of that. Not just caring for people, but responding to their dynamism, responding to their need for security, for physical security, but also responding to their need for risk as well. And then I think we have to think about politics, and we have to think about how, if I started off the lecture with this sort of extraordinary archaeological dig of contemporary consumer products, streams of innovation and sensitivity pouring into Drek. How do we bring some of that energy and expertise to the question of how we do politics, because politics is broken. And so maybe, again, we can play around with the idea of what political representation of political parties are. That's been a tendency for the last 20 years, the carnivals against capitalism in 1999, the battles against Seattle, the Occupy and the student movement, Occupy movement being inspired by Adbusters. The whole relationship between play and politics and the new forms of politics is actually quite strong, and I think we should keep trying to build on it. Okay, very quickly, so there we are. As I said before at the start, there was no environment in my first book, and there'll be a lot of environment in our second book. And that's my question. Look at this riot of signs and forms and ingenuity and technical solutions. Surely we can do something with this that's not just this. And but it's not easy. It's not easy, and this is where we get into what we begin to talk about as radical animals, because to support play is to support possibility in the human condition, and the human condition can do many different things, dark and light, constructive and destructive. Stewart Brand, I don't know if you know Stewart Brand, he's a very sort of famous, he was part of the merry pranksters in the 60s, became a kind of business guru, is a sort of core figure of that original moment of play from the 60s and 70s, which came out through the counterculture. So he started off, as I say, a prankster, a merry prankster, taking dollar bills and throwing them in the stock exchange in New York and watching everybody scramble about for them. That was his idea of a merry prank. Then set up something called the Global Business Network. There he is, chatting away with Steve Jobs. And his number one phrase in 1968 was the strapline to a book that he created called The Whole Earth Catalogue. It was basically the internet before the internet, everything you need all the tools you need to survive in one book. But his T-shirt phrase was, "We are as gods and we might as well get good at it." So that's absolutely putting human ingenuity at the core of a social story. And his solutions at that time was do it yourself, small is beautiful, soft technology, make it close to your hands, keep it tied to craft. In 2009, he wrote a book called The Whole Earth Discipline, where he completely changed, and he said, because of environmental urgencies, we are as gods and we must get good at it. And for him, that meant nuclear power now, genetic technology now, terraforming and manipulation of the climate now. So that's a very profound and historic player in a number of fields. But if you dedicate yourself to that level of flexibility and agency, you don't know where you're going to end up in response to the times and the circumstances. He thinks he's being adaptive to the current circumstances. I actually disagree, but it's a story of how a player, how a commitment to play can take you into quite interesting and sometimes challenging places. This is just another perspective. I won't talk about it at all very much, but the idea of planetary boundaries is the idea that there are systems that bound the planet, that if we stay within those systems, we basically have a playground, we have a societal playground. So as long as we don't trigger runaway effects in not just climate, biodiversity and chemical pollution, but in aerosols and acids in the oceans and nitrogen in agriculture and so forth and so on, if we don't breach those boundaries, within those boundaries, we can basically enjoy ourselves as the creative human beings we obviously love to be. But again, for him, that involves nuclear power guaranteeing certain energy supplies. But that's another vision of the planetary limits that again challenges us in terms of what do we regard as good or bad innovation, what do we regard as good or bad ingenuity. How do we want the scientific process, the primary scientific process, to proceed? How do we handle its outcomes? And that's just another perspective. I'd recommend the book, but he basically presumes that Gaia is waiting for us to be its nervous system. It's a great book. It's not quite relevant, but anyway. And just finally, the final slide, and I'll stop now, is what do I mean by a radical animal? Because I think that's the really fascinating consequence of looking at the multidisciplinary human condition through the lens of play, is that it's a commitment to an unpredictability and a dynamism that is open. Yuval Harari, I don't know if you know the book Sapiens. Does anybody know the book Sapiens? This is the follow-up to Yuval Harari's book Sapiens, called Homo Deus. And he just goes for it in terms of the science fiction visions. He thinks that intelligence, the smart processing of information will be outstripping human intelligence quite soon. That's not the same as human consciousness. So we're in a space whereby we have invented free machines that will be able to generate their own better versions without us having that much input. They'll start to evolve and develop themselves. That's already happening in ways that are opaque to human intention. And that's a new force in the world. That's a new natural force almost in the world. And how we cope with that is fascinating. But he says he wants to identify what is, I guess, is a ground on which we stand in a world of ever-complexifying systems. And he says it's consciousness. And he says my test for what is real is to ask the question, does it suffer? Does it suffer? And this is really, really interesting question. Harari is a Buddhist, a Vipassana meditator, and an animal rights activist. And that's so interesting in the context of thinking about play, because play is one of the things that actually connects us to the natural world. We can see play in other mammals, we can see it in other creatures to some degree, in birds, but strangely enough, if we're constantly trying to think of ways whereby we can be connected to the planet such that we love it, such that we defend it, it's not necessarily, hair-shirtedness and reducing our appetites and becoming ascetics. It may well be reminding ourselves that with many, many other fellow creatures, non-human creatures on this planet, we We live to play, we thrive through play. But we're also the animal that when we play with limits, and we play with all limits. So, next, the places I think we're going to go with this book, Indra and I are going to go with this book, is to look at the crossover between play and mindfulness. Because play, again, allows us to take a meta perspective on who we are and what we're doing. And so does mindfulness from the Buddhist traditions and the contemplative traditions. As I say, I think someone might have already got there first. Alan Watts, the great Zen guru from the 60s. But, we're in very, very groundless, slippery times, both politically and scientifically and historically. And I think it's a really urgent question to figure out what we can stand on. And I wonder whether what we can stand on is simply the fact that we can, whether with a combination of play and mindfulness, we can observe ourselves in this moment. That may be as much as we can do reliably. Okay, just some questions, so you can ask me questions at the end. So how does play, creativity, and innovation relate? And where does spontaneity end in the process, and where does control begin? If we understood the evolutionary role of play better, how might we change our societies, economics, and ourselves? And how radical can play be? As I say, if all possibilities are lightly considered in play, if that's what play is, all serious possibilities lightly considered, what horrors as well as what delights may come from that? Okay, I hope that was interesting. Useful, maybe too much to ask for. But thank you very much, and please ask me some questions. Thank you. Or talk amongst yourselves, that would be good. Anyway, hands up, here we go. Oh, thank you. The man who hired me is going to ask the first question. That's fantastic. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Pat. That was really fascinating talk. I wanted to ask you about those neuroscientists that you mentioned. I absolutely recognise the kind of, turn towards neuroscience to find authority for other disciplines. We get a lot of that in arts and humanities, of course. So the question was, where do you think that authority is going to take us? Is it going to just take us into a more sort of enclosed version of neoliberalism, or do you see it as offering a way out of that?
Sure. Well, it's interesting. I'll give you a story on that. Panksepp has created the world's first antidepressant that's come from a study of the creative processes in the brain. So he has basically created a drug. It's called Glix-11. I don't know what the final trade name will be, but it's incredibly effective in trials. And so he's basically going to provide this antidepressant that will induce a state of playful play and playfulness in patients. Now, so that's one end of the question. So the question is, to what degree does, applied neuroscience ameliorate problems that are more structural than epiphenomenal, if you know what I mean? So if the question is, how do you adapt? Are you healthy does it make you healthy in a sick society? It's a really good question, but again, primary science just goes there and generates the options, and we have to deal with that. I think the other way that we have to find a sort of politics of neurosociety, I guess you would call it, is on the realm of the virtual worlds that we are being invited to live in. I mean, we already live in virtual worlds. Heidegger was talking about virtuality, never mind Manuel Castells, never mind Jaron Lanier. But we do already live with a layer of digital simulation. Every time we go here, we are in constructed worlds, and it will become more and more invasive and immersive. So I think we have to become politicians of consciousness. We have to be. The politics almost has to be about mind share and attention, and quality of attention, and the spaces and zones within which certain kinds of attention can be applied. And I mean, one of the things that I'll give you a final scary scenario. In Davos this year, Mark Zuckerberg said, my ideal in 20 years' time is for someone to think a thought and it immediately manifests itself in the world, or it manifests itself in someone else's mind. So the great dream of telepathy is a research project for Mark Zuckerberg. Now, what's the politics of that? Well, you could be a Luddite and stop it. You can smash the looms. Or you can think, well, what might that offer? For the contemplative traditions and for the meditative traditions, and even for the humanistic traditions, the idea that you are mastering your own thoughts, or that you are aware of your own thought processes, that you are non-reactive to your own urges, could be one of the master skills of the coming age. But what is the politics of that? What is the politics of mindfulness? What is the politics of being able to be aware of how yourself is being pulled into all these different systems, and that you want to make some choices about how that's happening? It's being conducted at a level which is quite formalistic, i.e., do we have ID cards or not, or to what extent do people monitor their shopping patterns such that they sell us? But I think there's a profounder question there, and the technology, playfully driven, through games, through social interactions, the technology is pushing us to a very profound philosophical point about the fuzzy space between I and we, and I and thou. But the technology is driving us there. So I'm at the frontier of thinking what the politics of that actually is, beyond the Luddite politics that says, stop, no further, I'm taking back control. Maybe that is the politics. Good question. Thank you. Any more? Yes. Oh, we're recording you, so the pearls of wisdom have to be recorded.
I work quite a lot with art, play, and games. And you just mentioned the word game, and you hadn't yet. And a lot of people, when they think about play, also think about game-based learning and other forms of gaming environments, open-ended or closed with rules. I was just wondering what your kind of thoughts about games and play in society and in lots of other contexts are.
Sure. I'm surprised I didn't mention games, actually. That's quite surprising to me. I think I've always had... I'm not a great games player myself. And I think that's because there's an element of the way that games sit in relation to play that needs to be quite carefully thought about. I was once involved in a process called Wonder Lab, where they urged me to set up rule sets and to delimit the world such that you could enjoy the game. So you say that this is possible and that's not possible, and to do that almost from a kind of bottom-up level. And I think personally, for me personally, it feels there's an authority question there about who sets up the game. I feel as if with games culture, we're in a situation where it's almost like a pre-60s indie movie moment, whereby a lot of authority is smuggled in, or a lot of... Actually, it seems like interactivity, Zizek calls it interpassivity, whereby people are being framed by the system, but they're not perceiving it necessarily as a system, and they don't necessarily have the literacy to create their own game systems. So when I think to the extent that game-based learning is giving kids that literacy, I think that's great. And I'm sort of expecting 5, 10, 15 years from now that we will get a kind of a culture of games comparable to punk rock, which was here's 3 chords and go and form a band. I would hope we get to a situation with games culture, which is, here's a few rule sets, here's a few mechanics, here's a powerful renderer, go and do it. Machinima, I think, was gesturing at that. So that's my thing. I understand in education it's very good pedagogical tool, but I'm very much for the indie games sector. I'm very much for the idea that people can make games quickly and cheaply. But I'm slightly anxious about their authority structures and implicit in them. In general, games are a subset of play. That's sort of how I regard it. And I think the whole idea that games are mistaken for play is quite wrong. because play is very much about grasping the materiality of the world, or living entirely inside your head, or having just a recombinatory spirit. So I slightly resist the gamification of play, actually. But I know there's lots of great work being done in that field. Is that okay? Thank you. Anyone else? Oh, okay, thank you.
Thank you. Thanks very much. I'm trying to sort of formulate what it is I want to say.
Okay.
But it's something that echoes for me after reading your 2004 book. Because I like the idea of the play ethic, just in fact of it being different, and that we live in a different world, and the work ethic forcing us to sort of feel good about ourselves if we work and we've got a job, and value ourselves from all of that.
Yeah.
And I thought play, and then I thought about play as related to fun, and I get a bit mixed up with that. And then I started you sort of defined what play was. And then, I'll be honest, when I read that, I thought, oh God, no, Pat, this seems like such hard work. I
What, the book?
do it. I can't do it. I've got to be creative. I've got to be innovative.
Yes.
I can't do it. I'm exhausted already.
Yep.
So, and I'm thinking, is a play ethic something which is just going to replace the work ethic? And that's got to drive us. And if we're not creative, if we're not innovative, somehow we're not so valued, or we've got to find a value within that.
Yeah.
Because I'm always, which sort of signifies a very active element of play. And what interests me today, this is why I'm trying to formulate it, is because you added on tonight the notion of mindful awareness, which isn't quite so active. This is something where we don't do, we're not human doings. It's about being a human being just occupying that space. So I don't know what it is I'm trying to formulate here, but this is the drift I've got. So are you suggesting that the play ethic is going to be a sort of driving force and could be possibly as oppressive as the work ethic? And mindfulness starts to detract away from that active sense. Does that...
Well, you've described the shift that I've made, and partly from working with Indra over the last 12 years. And I was talking about it a bit in the original book when I was talking about the need for play to be counteracted by care. So, but I think, you can imagine how excited I was to discover that care was one of Panksepp's fundamental evolved human drives. So I think to answer your question, that was it's a book of its time. But I think it was a starting point for me to explore the landscape of human nature and human interior life and generally from a number of angles. And I think certainly the whole meditation, mindfulness, neuroscience angle has been fascinating. But also increasingly the interspecies nature of play, the way that it actually connects us to non-human experience. And I find that, and the third element of that might be that our playful ingenuity could generate a silicon, and whether it's a consciousness or an intelligence is up for discussion. So I think, and then all the other aspects of the emotional frameworks that were mentioned there on those slides, panic. Panic is about fundamental separation anxiety, which is sort of one of the fundamental experiences of being an organism. Curiosity, basic curiosity, never mind playful curiosity, but just a sort of sense of being oriented in the world. I mean, I could go down the rich list of terms that affective neuroscience and in dialogue with the meditation traditions is coming up with. But that to me, to fit play within that framework is a very rich and profoundly human and humanistic thing to do. And I think that the way that evolutionary thinking has identified play as the kind of lubricant for possibilities, it opens up niches where niches have closed down. And even in terms of that functionality within a life that is fragile, that is loving, that is lustful, that that is angry because it has to deal with fight and flight. You know, we have all these inheritances. Panksepp calls it the archaeology of the mind. The mind has an archaeology, and the further down you go, the brain, the more we share it with other creatures. So these emotions are powerful. But to discover that play is one of these emotions, but in a suite of others, is a real insight for me. And I think enriches its effectivity. Whereas I think certainly in 2004, it was the deus ex ludica, or the deus ex machina of everything. The play was the way whereby we could cope with the information age, because information age was a more responsive, expressive age, and the structures were more responsive and expressive. And so I was trying to think of how do we make this valid rather than make it seem destructive and frazzling and unraveling. And I think that's still a good question to ask in the context of the last 6 months, the last 3 months, and here and in the US. How do we cope with the consequences of our own ingenuity and dynamism? And I think we need to keep thinking about that. So very good, and you picked it up correctly. Yes, it's behind.
Do you think we need to find ways of play where we can contact our inner self more, our spiritual side? Is that kind of what you're going towards at the moment? Yeah,
I'm trying to explore it. I can't use the word, I can utterly respect the word spiritual. I can't figure out what it means for me. I like the definition of spiritual that Fritjof Capra has in The Web of Life. He says it's called the breath of life. So the spirit is the thing that animates a system that would otherwise look static.
And if you talk about meditation, that's so much to do with breathing as well.
Yes.
But also it's been said we are not human beings having a spiritual experience, we are spiritual beings having a human experience.
Yes, I'm very well aware of that. Very well aware of that perspective. I'll give you a very specific example from my own practice as a singer, because I'm still a working singer. And I've suddenly discovered that my routine that was given to me by a singing teacher about 10 years ago involves element of breathing, elements of Alexander technique, elements of mental projection into different parts of my bodies to generate. I've been sort of meditationized without necessarily realizing it, but it's been incredibly successful as a tool for me to be a productive singer into my early 50s. So I think the question of self-craft and self-practice is also a very interesting area here. And I mean, play to help you think about the level of stick-at-itness and repetition and commitment, beyond what would seem to be a reasonable level that's required for good practice. I think play is a helpful framework to think about it in. So I'm on a journey on that. I don't know where I'll end up, but I'm kind of on that journey. Quite agree with you. How are we doing? 10 minutes. Any more questions? Oh, yes, please.
Thanks. It was great to see play as one of the sort of fundamental characteristics, along with fear and the others. And I wonder if it'd be interesting to hear a little bit about the relationship between them. For example, fear and play. And you've just described sort of overcoming fear to be able to play in a way. So something about the relationship would be interesting. And then just practical things, so how we can support ourselves or others to kind of prime ourselves to be ready for playful play.
Sure. Well, I mean, the person who's given me the best framework for thinking about how play relates to the other modalities is the educationalist Brian Sutton Smith in his book The Ambiguity of Play, 1997. And he talks about play as adaptive potentiation, and what he means by that is that it's a way to mimic, or his actual literal phrase is that play is about mimicking or mocking the rituals of survival. So that's his definition of what it is. It mimics or mocks the exigencies of survival. So to that extent, if the play space is working, then its relationship to fear, for example, is to literally play with the fear. So there are edges that kids go to the very edge of the thing, and they just play with the idea of going forward. And the parent panics, but what the child is mastering is ontological fear. or rage. You know, the idea of play fighting is obvious and is often a way that educationalists misread stages of, for example, young male development, you know, by seeing what seems to be violence and misreading it as that, whereas it's actually, again, a kind of necessary liminal playing with lines and boundaries and forces. So I think this really is pretty relevant to the kindergarten initiative that I was talking about, because if one of the things that the evolutionary accounts tell you is that you mustn't mistake rough and tumble play, and that's not just physical rough and tumble, but social rough and tumble play. You mustn't mistake it for pathology. It must be allowed to happen, because this is how play has developed and prototyped the complex social bond that you require to be a complex adult with other complex adults in the wider world. So a healthy play zone literally allows everything to be tested and challenged in ways that where the consequences are not high. And that's, in a sense, to answer your question, is to observe a play zone that's healthily playing with the elementals is where it's doing its best job. I mean, I think there are, I can't go through all the lists of, there must be about sort of 12 to 15 attempts at evolutionary givens that I mentioned in those slides, you know, but I think it would be an interesting research pathway to figure out the relationship between the primary emotions and how those emotions are played with. In fact, I would direct your attention to Brian Sutton Smith's last essay in the American Journal of Play that he wrote before he went into dementia, which talks about exactly that. Talks about second-order emotions from primary-order emotions and how those are played with. So, yeah, there's your research reference. How are we doing? 5 minutes. More questions will be great.
Yeah. My question sort of follows on from the lady's question, which I thought was a good one, and it surrounds spectating, whether or not spectating comes into this idea of play, because what I got from your presentation was a presentation which, an idea of play which was very interactive and involved a lot of giving of yourself. And I think more and more, if you ask people what they enjoy to play, they'll say, okay, sitting down and watching something, or going and listening to something. I mean, I've just sat here and listened to you, but I've enjoyed it. I don't know if I'm at play at the moment, but it's a case of, you'll know it yourself, being a musician. I mean, you were at play when you're learning to play a bit of music and get yourself, but I'm sure where does emotions come into this in terms of, because I'm not sure that process was all fully a positive one. You have to give yourself, you have to give grit, determination, sort of discipline, get up in the morning to do it. So it's a sort of two-part question. Where does spectating come in to that, and does that count as play? And also, it seems to be that your definition of play has rested more on the positive rather than the negative. I mean, you ask a professional sportsman sometimes, they go, I absolutely hate playing what I do. They hate it because they have to do it. Sure. There's that negative aspect that I don't think you've covered, or maybe would you like to reflect on that?
Absolutely. I can't tell you how much I hate doing singing practice at certain points. Oh my God, the routine of that. I can be a bad boy and not do it for ages, and then I get subverted because I haven't done it. So there's a thing from game theory which is quite good about the relationship between zero-sum games and non-zero-sum games, and or finite games and infinite games. You know, and so craft and self-discipline and stick-to-itness is the finite game, but the question is it at service of the infinite game? And the infinite game being that moment in performance when you think you can do anything, and you just about can. But the Gladwell notion of the 10,000 hours that he talks about in Outliers, which has been refuted and pushed around with, but I can absolutely tell you a lot of creative people find that intuitively correct, which is to say that if you do 10,000 hours at a certain level of intensity and excellence, it doesn't matter what people evaluate you as, you are at a state of mastery in terms of the domain that you're in. But I think that's the question. There's a beautiful book by James Carse called Finite and Infinite Games, which I would refer you to. But Carse says, a finite game can be at the service of an infinite game. You're toiling away to build up your capacities to do something amazing, and to do something amazing that inspires other people to do something amazing. That's the point. An infinite game is about engendering more play. A finite game is about winning. So you can win with your technique. I managed to do those scales today. I managed to do those jumps today. But it's best if you put it at the service of a practice that aims at beauty, power, intensity, passion. And the display element is the point at which that either inspires other practice or inspires interpretation of that practice. So that's the relationship between play and display. And I don't think I do shy away from the dark end of it, because I think what I've been trying to do with some of the material in the slides is to say that play sits within an absolute tumult of necessary but often antithetical and primal emotions. And it can, I think for some people it can be a conduit to triggering those. I mean, the Farage poster is a semiotic play. There's no doubt about it. It's a recombination of elements that represents a creative search for an innovative moment. Above. I know above the Camp Auschwitz it was Arbeit macht frei. I don't know whether above the Marquis de Sade's boudoir was Spiel macht frei. I don't know. But play doesn't necessarily make you free. It's a principle of possibility. It's free in itself. It's a free process and principle. But what it can open up takes us back to the mindfulness question. It takes us back to what is witnessing the play of human possibilities. And I think that's becoming a very big question at the moment. No, I so often don't like to practice, it's true. But if it gets me to the gig, that's good too. Thanks for your question. Thank you. Oh, the hook is coming from the side of the stage. There we go.
Okay, there's a reception upstairs in the Somerset Cafe, which are all very welcome to come and join us in and carry on the conversation up there. Thank you all for your questions this evening. And please join me in thanking Pat for a brilliant talk.